Good morning, students. Today we will start with our second session of the day. For this, we have with us Dr. Parvati K. Iyer. She is an assistant professor at Center for Studies in Science, Technology and Innovation Policy, Central University of Gujarat, Gandhinagar. Dr. Parvati has joined the Center for Studies in Science, Technology and Innovation Policy as an assistant professor in August 2010. Her doctoral degree on social construction of drug quality in the Indian pharmaceutical industry, as well as her MPhil degree in the domain of gender and science in agriculture research, was awarded from the Department of Sociology, University of Hyderabad. She teaches MPhil courses on Introduction to Science, Technology and Society Studies, Science and Technology in Modern India, Research Methodology, Technology Futures Analysis, and Sciences and Technology Policy Analysis. She has publications in edited volumes and national and international journals. During her PhD, she was the recipient of Jawaharlal Nehru Scholarship for Doctoral Studies in India and University with Potential for Excellence Fellowship for Doctoral Studies at the University of Hyderabad. During her pre-doctoral years, she has also worked as a fellow QHS at the National Institute of Science, Technology and Development Studies, a CSIR institute located in Delhi, and as a project associate at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Delhi. Besides teaching a course on research methodology for a semester to MA students and holding research position in a DST sponsored project at Department of Sociology, University of Hyderabad. So with this short introduction, I invite Dr. Parvati Iyer to deliver her talk. Doctor, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Murugan. And I'm really grateful to you for allowing me to be part of this extremely useful initiative, this BIRAC Sitare BIIS program. And the topic for my, I'll be delivering my lecture on the topic of Introduction to Research Methodology. So I'll just share screen with all of you. Just a minute. So, just a minute. Yeah. So, 1 minute. I think I have to share my screen. Yeah, so yes. I hope the screen is visible now.
You can go to the slideshow mode, full screen.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So is it visible now?
Yes.
Yeah, just one. So basically, as I said, I'll be discussing about certain elementary concepts and issues related to research methodology. Now, as Dr. Murugan has pointed out to you, I am a social scientist by training. So, and working on this, bridge area between science and society. So what I will be doing in today's session is to talk about certain basic concepts related to research and the process of doing research, methodology, and so on. And I will also be talking a little bit about the social basis of science and technology and the philosophical aspects of science, because I think this is also a perspective which will be very useful and fruitful for you as scientists. And in fact, in any discussion of research methodology, we need to talk about the philosophy of science and the social aspects of science and technology as well. And I'm sure that you might have gone into it a little bit when you talked about certain aspects of grassroots innovation and so on, because I've been looking at your program schedule. Now, let's begin with this concept of research methodology itself. So how do we understand the notion of research itself? Now, see, we all inhabit a certain world, a certain reality, and we try to understand. And research is a process of actually trying to understand about this reality which is around us. And it is, in fact, a systematic form of inquiry. By systematic form of inquiry means that there is a certain method, that there is a certain process involved in it. Another important aspect of research is that when we talk of research, the novelty element of research is very important. What do we mean by the novelty element? Novelty element means when we are doing research, we are actually trying to search for new facts. Now, these new facts can be in any branch of knowledge. Research, of course, is not just confined to the sciences. You can do research in social sciences, humanities. So, but this is a common element, with all these disciplines, that you engage in inquiry, you try to come up with new facts, and this inquiry is not done randomly, but it is done in a systematic way. So through the process of research, you can actually investigate into various kinds of phenomena. You can engage in experimentation, and this experimentation is actually directed towards discovering and interpreting certain facts, or there are certain theories, and you might work on these theories, and then based on your empirical findings, you might revise those accepted theories, or your findings might, we have seen anyway in the history of science how, scientists have worked continuously on a research problem, and over a period of time, they come up with generalizations, they come up with laws, and so on. And some of these, of course, relate to basic concepts, and others have more applicability. So when we say that we are doing research, we are actually trying to define problems. See, if you look at the way in which research is done, and I will be speaking a little more about that process as well. So, the starting point of research is to come up with a particular problem in which you want to work. And then on the basis of your observations or whatever literature that you have in hand, you formulate a tentative hypothesis, and then in order to verify that hypothesis, in order to test that hypothesis, you collect your data, you organize your data, you analyze and you evaluate that data. And on the basis of those evaluations, you make certain deductions and you reach certain conclusions. Okay. And then on the basis of it, you can prove or disprove your hypothesis. Now, an important feature of the research process is that it is supposed to be unbiased and it is supposed to be objective. Lack of bias means you can't bring in your personal preferences or your personal predilections into the research process, and you are supposed to maintain a certain kind of objectivity. That is, you cannot allow your biases, your perceptions to interfere with the research process. So roughly, this is how we understand the notion of research. Now, let us go to the second term, methodology. Now, if you see, there are three important dimensions when we talk about methodology. You know, sometimes people confuse methodology with methods. Now, methods refer to using of certain instruments and processes whereby you are trying to collect data. That data can be collected in different ways depending upon your disciplinary orientations. But if you look at the nature of methodology, then there are three important dimensions there. First is, of course, the tools and methods of data collection. And as I said earlier, your tools and methods of data collection will differ depending upon whether you come from sciences or social sciences. If you are from social sciences, you would either administer a questionnaire or you would say do in-depth interviews with your respondents, and then you will try to come up with some data, and then so you use certain methods. Now in the sciences, you would engage in experimental method. So the tools, so the first dimension of methodology is the tools and methods that you use for data collection. The second dimension is data analysis. Now you can't collect your data and say, okay, I'm done, but you need to process that data, you need to sift through that data, you need to evaluate it, and you need to come up with, you need to understand it, and you need to evaluate it in a certain sense. And you do that when you engage in data analysis. And again, the process of data analysis is different, both if for the sciences and the social sciences. And we'll talk about this aspect in more detail when we discuss about quantitative and qualitative methods. And the third dimension of methodology is, and which I feel is the most important and the most critical, is the philosophy, theory, or epistemology. Epistemology is nothing but the theory of knowledge, you know. So there needs to be a larger theoretical base, or there needs to be a framework in which you are actually locating the data that you collect. Otherwise, the data that you collect is random. It does not really make sense. But when you locate it in the context of a theoretical framework, then you can position that data in a different way. You can relate it to earlier findings in that particular discipline. So the third and most important dimension of methodology is the philosophy, theory, or epistemology, which actually guides the way in which you do the research or your conduct of research. Now, how does it guide the conduct of the research? It guides the conduct of the research in terms of the way in which you define the problem, or even the method, the design, the research design that you use. So research methodology is actually a collation of all these processes and procedures, wherein you identify a research problem, then on the basis of that, you formulate a research design where you choose certain methods whereby you collect your data, and then once you collect your data, you process it, you analyze it, and then you come up with certain findings. In this regard, I need to tell you a little more about why is it that we need to engage in research, or actually what is the purpose of research? See, first of all, purpose of research is through research, we are trying to find out answers. We are trying to apply certain scientific procedures, and we are trying to find out answers to certain larger questions. And so what is the purpose behind doing this? So the purpose behind doing this is to understand the nature of reality, to understand the nature of the world around us, whether it is whether we are talking about natural reality or social reality. And as I said, the main purpose is to find out something which has not been found out as yet. So the novelty aspect is a very important dimension in research. Of course, if you structure, as I said, research methodology is actually a very broad kind of domain, and the methods that you use, the techniques of analysis that you use would differ depending upon whether you are located in the natural sciences or the social sciences. So even if we talk about research objectives, you can actually group your research, the kind of research that you do, on the basis of the objectives. Say, for instance, we want to learn about a new phenomenon, or we want to obtain some kind of new insights about an event or a phenomenon or about an institution, then this kind of research we refer to as exploratory research or formative research studies. Now, supposing we want to find out about, we want to describe a particular phenomenon in more detail. That is, you want to depict the characteristics of a particular event. Could be a scientific event, could be a social event, or a particular situation, or you want to describe the working of a particular organization, and so on. So studies which deal with this kind of research we refer to as descriptive research or descriptive studies. Now, sometimes you want to look at the relationship between variables. That is, you want to find out whether at all there is a relationship between variables. Like, for instance, you'd like to find out the relationship between climate change and, say, increase in heart diseases. Okay, I'm just giving you an example at random. So then what you are trying to do is you are trying to test causality there, or you are trying to look at, say, the relationship between natural disasters and climate change. Okay, so you are trying to see what kind of an impact natural disasters have been having on climate change over a period of time. So in that context, you are trying to test the hypothesis whereby you are trying to have some kind of a causal relationship between variables. That means you are trying to say that variable A is actually causing variable B. So these kind of studies, you can also refer to them as hypothesis testing studies. Okay. Now, there could be certain other studies where you are simply trying to find out what is the frequency with which some particular event is occurring. So whether it is related to another event or not. Okay, so in that context, you can call this kind of a research as diagnostic studies. Okay, so based on the objective of your research also, you can have different kinds of research. Now, again, when we talk of research methods, because we are talking about methodology and methods, now there is also a tendency to confuse between research design and research method. Now, in research design, basically you are trying to formulate a detailed plan of analysis, in order to find answers to your research question. Okay, and research methodology is actually, a research method is actually a strategy in that particular research design. So your research design would include, what is the scope of your study and who are going to be your respondents, or what kind of experiments you are going to conduct, what kind of methods you are going to use, what is going to be your plan of analysis, and even the duration and so on. And if you are engaged in a project, even budgetary details, everything. So all that becomes part of your research design, and research method would just be one of the strategies in that particular research design. Okay. Now, the other thing that we need to understand here is, so when we talk of research and research methodology, see, there are also certain steps which are undertaken while doing research. The first step would be identifying and defining a problem. So as I said, in order to engage in research, first of all, you need to have a research problem in mind. You need to have research questions in mind. Okay. Now, of course, without, even if you now, even if you come up with research questions, now how do you justify those research questions? You justify those research questions on the basis of a prior literature survey. Now, what do we mean by a literature survey?
Yeah. I think the slides are not moving.
Yeah, actually, I have not made a slide. Yeah, I'm just in the initial stage, actually.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Just for clarification.
Yeah. But sir, I hope I'm clear.
Yes, doctor.
Yeah. Thank you. So basically, first of all, you need to start with identifying and defining a particular problem. Now, in order to identify and define a particular problem, you need to engage in review of literature. You need to sort of look through the prior literature. Now, why is this important? Of course, and again, I want to point out that this happens. So this is done irrespective of whether you are a scientist or a social scientist. So why do you do this? What is the purpose behind doing this? So the purpose behind doing this is that you need to connect your research to the prior findings. So you need to have an idea about what has been discovered or what has been found out on this particular area before, and how you can add to this existing body of knowledge. What are the dimensions that have not been explored? That means the main purpose, before you even identify and you define your research problem, you need to actually, you would identify a broad area, and then you need to look into the literature in that particular area. And the purpose behind looking into this literature is to actually come up with research gaps. There might be data gaps, okay, or there might be research gaps, as in certain dimensions of the research problem would not have been investigated. So you need to, so doing this or engaging in this process will actually help you to formulate your research problem and your research questions in a systematic manner. Then, of course, once you have firmed up your research objectives after undertaking your review of literature, then you need to think about what kind of data you want to collect. And again, that depends on your disciplinary orientation, whether you are going to in social sciences, either you use the survey method, and then there are certain qualitative methods also, which we'll be discussing, or you may engage in experimental work, you engage in laboratory related work, which is what happens in the sciences, and then you collect your data. And then, of course, even before doing that, on the basis of the existing knowledge that you have, you will formulate a tentative hypothesis about your study. And we will be discussing these concepts also, what we mean by theory, what we mean by hypothesis, and so on. And of course, being a scientist, you will try to conduct experiments in order to test this hypothesis. And then once you get certain results, you will try to interpret these results And then sometimes, you may even have to repeat the steps until you find an acceptable solution. Now, we will discuss these aspects in detail. We will talk about the conducting of scientific research. But first, let us look at certain basic concepts. For instance, the notion of science. Okay, so science, of course, it involves the systematic observation of natural events and conditions. Okay, so you observe the world around you, you observe various events, you observe certain conditions which exist in nature, and the purpose is to generate certain facts and to come up with laws and principles. Of course, we are not going to be you're not going to be the first scientist who is going to do that. If you look at the history of scientific knowledge, you find that there are any number of illustrious theories, say, across different scientific disciplines. Take the case of Big Bang theory, or, if you are looking at astronomical phenomenon, you take Hubble's law of cosmic expansion, or even your, law of gravitation or law of thermodynamics, and so on. So, so the basic objective of science is to undertake a systematic observation and to come up with laws and principles. Okay. So over a period of time, we find that scientists have undertaken these kind of systematic, they have undertaken this kind of systematic observation and study, and there is an organized body of knowledge. Okay, now certain aspects of that knowledge might be tentative, in the sense that, this is the interesting thing about scientific facts. Scientific facts are always tentative in nature. They are never definite, because suddenly new knowledge can emerge, new knowledge, new observations, new findings can emerge, and existing facts and theories can be disputed. And if they do not fit in the light of these new facts, then they can even be discarded. Okay, so so based on this particular process, you look at any branch of knowledge, whether it's biology, physics, geology, astronomy, etc., you will find that it is based on these particular principles. So that leads us to the question of what is the nature of science? How do we understand the nature of science? So science is empirical in nature. Of course, when we discuss about science and social science and, the social dimensions of science and technology, then maybe, we'll have to do a rethink on many of these things. But if you look at the conventional view of science and technology, science is regarded as something which is empirical, which is based on the reality around us, which is factual in nature. Objectivity also implies the factual, that is, scientific knowledge is not based on our subjective understanding or our personal likes and dislikes. It is highly objective in nature. Again, as I told you, it is tentative. That is, you cannot refer to any scientific knowledge or theory or principle or law as definite. It's always tentative. It always has a tentative dimension to it, because new facts can come to light, as a result of which you might modify existing theory or existing laws, or you might discard them completely. Again, we find that the nature of science is also, in a sense, we can call it parsimonious. By parsimonious, what we mean is that scientific knowledge seeks out the simplest explanations in order to describe or in order to understand a particular phenomenon. And lastly, science is also concerned with theory, as we said that it is concerned with, formulating laws and generalizations, etc. Then Another term which we commonly use is technology. So technology is basically the process by which we try to manipulate nature. In that sense, technology is more instrumental in nature, because there is a kind of manipulation or modification of nature involved, and we do this in order to, for human beings have several kinds of needs and wants, and through technology, we try to satisfy these needs and wants. So when you refer to technology, technology actually has three dimensions to it. I've not listed the third one, but the first is the physical, technology. You can understand technology as a physical object, say a machine. So you can look at a machine, you can touch it, you can understand it as a physical object or artifact. The second aspect of technology is know-how. Technology also implies a certain process. Say, for instance, raw materials, they undergo a process, they undergo transformation, like rubber would undergo a transformation with other materials in order to become a tire. Okay, so there is the element of know-how as well. And third is actually it's a process. Okay, so technology is also a process. So the first refers to the physicality or the materiality of technology. The second dimension refers to the knowledge aspect, that there is a certain know-how, that there is a certain knowledge which is involved in the transformation of raw materials or in the transformation of elements found in nature to certain finished goods. And the third aspect is that, there is also a process which is involved there. And this is a social process, because, even science and technology also happens within a social context. So this is one way of actually understanding technology. And in fact, this definition of technology, that is the know-how and creative processes that actually assist people to utilize tools, resources, and systems to solve problems and enhance control over the natural and man-made environment in order to improve human condition. This is a definition which is given by the OECD. Okay, so this is a standard definition. Now, another concept which we need to understand in this regard is the concept of innovation. Innovation, of course, we know there is a novelty aspect to innovation, where there is a novelty aspect and an applied aspect as well to innovation, where you are trying to engage in successful application of a new idea. Now, of course, there is a difference between innovation and invention, because in invention, it is the first time a particular idea is being floated, in the context of a new process or product. So invention has to do more, with, as I said, the novelty element is there, and innovation would be the application of that particular idea in a successful way. So, in that sense, there is a difference between the concept of invention and the concept of innovation. And again, you can understand innovation in terms of incremental innovation and radical innovation. And incremental innovation is when you try to adapt or modify something, and radical innovation where, you are doing completely something new. Say, for instance, an example of incremental innovation would be, say you are, you have your mobile, now you have your touch technology. Now, if you are trying to, you come up with, so if you look at earlier mobile phones, And if you look at more recent mobile phones and you look at how the technology has been modified, so it is not something radical, but it is something incremental. It has happened over a period of time. And radical innovation would be, something like the internet or a World Wide Web, which is a totally new idea, and which actually influenced how knowledge is communicated from one part of the globe to another. Now, again, you can take the example, theory is again a concept which we use very commonly in the context of research. And as I told you, in science itself, we have seen, there are numerous theories and laws, etc. So what do you mean by theory? So by theory, you are actually trying to provide an explanation or a model in order to understand a particular phenomenon. So in that sense, a theory is also like a conceptual framework where you are trying to put whatever data or observations you have in terms of a frame in an orderly and a logical manner. So, whatever facts you have, you try to situate it against that particular frame in a logical manner. That means, there is some rationality, there is some reasoning involved. And again, theory has to withstand the force of time, as in, theory cannot be any generalization is accepted as a theory only over a period of time. Once some research has gone on that particular area over a period of time, and that's why we refer to theory as a time-tested explanation. Now, another important feature of a theory is that it doesn't just describe why a particular phenomenon occurs or how that particular phenomenon occurs, but in a sense, it also shows the direction for further research. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that any theory is tentative in nature and it can be modified or discarded in the light of new evidence. Now, hypothesis. Now, again, hypothesis is a term which we use in the context of research. And how do we understand hypothesis? See, hypothesis can be understood as a tentative explanation. Okay, so we have, supposing we have undertaken review of literature, and then, so we have a hunch. It is like some kind of an intuition or a hunch based on whatever facts we know, and we come up with a hypothesis about a particular event or a phenomenon. Okay, so we have some kind of a rational explanation of that phenomenon in our mind, but we have not yet proved it. Okay, so it is still unproved, which means it is tentative or it is temporary in nature. And hypothesis is testable and it is falsifiable as well. That is, you need to test the hypothesis, obviously, because it is tentative. And once you test it and you engage in your experiment, and then, there are also, for instance, in statistics, there are certain statistical procedures which you engage in for testing of hypothesis. And then you may find that your hypothesis is false. So hypothesis is testable and falsifiable in nature. Now, only when the hypothesis is accepted, only then it is adopted as theory. Now, in addition, see, there are certain other concepts also which we use and we take them for granted. Now, say, for instance, a concept like research and development. So how do you understand the notion of R&D? R&D is a term which we use commonly. How do you understand this term? So research and development includes creative and systematic work which is undertaken in order to increase the stock of knowledge, including knowledge of humankind, culture, and society, and to devise new applications of available knowledge. Again, this is an OECD definition. It's very broad. So R&D is actually, in that sense, it is very broad. The notion of research and development is very broad in its scope. But there are also certain criteria. If you consider an activity to be an R&D activity, there are 5 criteria that it should satisfy. First thing is it should be novel. As I said, the novelty element is very important in research. Secondly, it must be creative. It must be able to give you new insights, very new and original insights into a particular phenomenon. Thirdly, it is also uncertain, as in, it is tentative. Sometimes, not much would have been. So if you are undertaking R&D in a particular area, obviously, this is not something that is done overnight. Say, for instance, medical research. When you look at R&D in medical research, the research part of it would take a couple of years. That is the in vitro, in vivo analysis, and so on. And if you look at the development part, the clinical trials part of it, that could take 5 to 6 years. And even after that, you would not come up with a drug which can be commercialized in the market. So in that sense, R&D activities can also be uncertain in nature. The same goes for vaccines also. Actually, vaccine testing or clinical trials in vaccine testing also takes an inordinately long period of time. Again, it must be systematic in nature. There is a certain logic or order to the process of undertaking R&D, and it must be transferable or reproducible. See, when you produce scientific knowledge, it should have that quality that it can be reproduced in a different spatio-temporal context. That means, just to give you an example, supposing I'm dropping a pen on the floor. So whether I drop it today, tomorrow, or 20 years later, that pen is going to drop on the floor. That means it has on the basis of this, they have discovered the law of gravity. So the law of gravity operates across spatio-temporal context. Any scientific law, if you see, it has the capacity to operate across spatio-temporal context. Whether I drop the pen here or in China or in the United States, it's going to fall to the ground. And in that sense, that's what we mean. That is, one sense in which we can understand the context of reproducibility. Another context is that, when you engage anything for it to be considered as valid, any R&D for it to be considered as valid must be reproducible. That is, it must be reproducible across different contexts. This is, of course, a general principle, but, of course, it can also be contested. But we won't go into that now. Yeah. Yeah. So now that we have looked at certain fundamental concepts, let us look at certain types of research. Now, of course, if you're looking into scientific research, the classifications would vary, but I have prepared a more generalized kind of classification. So, based on the viewpoint of application, you can actually classify research into pure or basic or fundamental research or applied research. Of course, pure research is research which is not really undertaken with any objective in mind, but it is driven by scientific curiosity or interest in a particular scientific questions. Okay. Now, this is of course done because it is, done keeping the scientist's interests in mind. It's not necessary that this kind of research should have practical application. Now, it might have practical application. Many things in science, if you look at the history of science, many concepts and theories which seemingly did not have practical application later on, went on to become very useful. So on the other hand, if you look at applied research, now applied research is done in order to actually resolve practical problems rather than to actually acquire knowledge for its own sake. For instance, if you want to develop some technology, say you want to develop some technology in order to improve the production process at the shop floor. Okay, so this kind of a research you would refer to as applied research. Now, even if you look at the nature of pure even if you look at the nature of basic research, because we talked about pure or basic research and applied research, even there again, you have different kinds of categories. So you have pure basic research and strategic basic research. And I think somewhere this distinction is very important because see, pure basic research is, when the nature of research was predominantly confined to academia. And you can actually find, if you look at the initial stages in which scientific knowledge evolved, so emphasis was more on pure and basic research. And the purpose was to actually generate new knowledge and without actually looking at the applicability aspects. Okay, so the main objective was actually to advance knowledge. Whereas if you look at strategic basic research, that is actually experimental in nature, and that is done in order to acquire knowledge into specific broad areas. Like one example, again, I can think of is from medical research, wherein, now even in firms, even in big pharmaceutical firms, you will have, units where they are engaging in basic research. It's not because, they're all devoted to doing knowledge for their own sake, but because certain aspects of medical research really need basic research. For instance, in order to understand about the mechanism of action of a disease, you need to undertake research in molecular biology. Okay, so this kind of only then, you can actually come up with a target molecule. The chances of coming up with a target molecule are more if you actually undertake basic research into the mechanism of action of a disease. So that's why, as I said, even, big pharma firms and pharma firms who are serious about their R&D, they'll have a basic research unit. So this kind of basic research is actually strategic because you are trying to undertake, you are trying to come up with new knowledge, and you are trying to, which is specifically directed to a particular area in the expectation that it will be useful to you in the kind of R&D that you are undertaking. Now, of course, if you look at the viewpoint of the objective of the research, that is, what is the objective of the research, there you can actually classify the research into 4 types. For instance, you have descriptive research. Okay, I had mentioned that earlier as well, where you are trying to systematically describe some particular event or phenomenon, or a situation, or an organization, and so on. So again, that depends on what your vantage point is. whether you're a scientist or a social scientist. So this kind of research we refer to as descriptive research. Again, the second kind of research, the second category here would be correlational research. That is, here you are trying to establish whether there is a relationship between two variables. That is, the basic question you are asking there is, what is the relationship between A and B? Or what is the impact or effect of A in B? Okay, or A on B, whatever. So this kind of research we refer to as correlational research. You are trying to establish a correlation or a connection between variables. Then the third kind of research is explanatory research. That is, in explanatory research, you are asking the question why. Okay, so there you are trying to see what is the reason. So if X and Y have a relationship with each other, then what is the reason that they are having that relationship? So that kind of research we refer to as explanatory research. And the fourth aspect is exploratory research. Now, sometimes, in cutting edge areas, like say artificial intelligence, mixed reality, say if you're doing research on mixed reality in India. Now, you don't really know much in that research area. You don't know what the significant issues and problems are. So so your intention there would be more to explore that area, to understand more about that area, so that in future, you can sort of fix on a definite research area. So this kind of research, the kind of research that is done in this context, we refer to as exploratory research. Now, this is again, I think, a distinction which you must know, because say on the basis of the strategies of inquiry, okay, you can actually distinguish between quantitative research and qualitative research. Now, before talking about quantitative research and qualitative research, you need to understand how, because there is a philosophical difference in terms of how both these different strategies of inquiry even understand the nature of reality. Okay, see, for instance, in scientific knowledge, that is conventionally, we accept that reality is unidimensional. And why I say unidimensional is the idea that scientists have is that it is possible to understand reality, the nature of reality, and it is possible to understand this reality through the scientific method. So how do you understand, how do you come to know about this world? Is it possible to understand? Because you're asking a larger philosophical question here. Is it really possible to understand the nature of the world and reality? And a typical scientist would tell you, yes, it is possible to do that. And you can actually look at nature, you can study nature, and it is possible to understand the nature of reality. But in social sciences, we understand the nature of reality a little differently. Okay, a social scientist would tell you that reality is determined by social context and location. Now, just to a very easy example to illustrate it is the idea of that famous story of the 6 blind men and an elephant. So you had so you have these 6 blind men who went into a room, and each of them touched a different part of that elephant, and each of them thought, so one person touched the trunk and he thought, okay, trunk is what, the elephant is this trunk. Another touched another say the tail, or another person got hold of another part of the elephant. So based on whatever part they touched, they said, okay, this is what the elephant is. Now, a social scientist would tell you that this is, this is the way social scientists actually think of reality. In the sense, they say that reality can never be completely discerned. We can only discern an aspect of reality based on our context and location. So this is the fundamental difference. And, in order to understand this, the fact that, even ideas about reality are different and they differ in terms of context and location. And even, see, there is nothing like, there is this, what you call this dialogue between objectivity and subjectivity in the context of social research, in the sense that, when social scientists, when they talk about the world, they talk about shared meanings. For instance, how do we communicate with each other? We make sense of the world. We make through shared meanings. Okay, so there is something, it's not, you can't call it subjectivity, but philosophically, you can say that there is some kind of intersubjectivity, and we make sense of this world through shared meanings. Okay, so people actually are co-constructing meanings and reality. And therefore, if you look at the strategies of inquiry of quantitative research and qualitative research, these are different. So quantitative research would look at phenomenon which is capable of being measured or capable of being quantified. Okay, now I don't want to go into those examples there. Survey research and experimental research. See, survey research is something that is done in social sciences, wherein, particularly in economics. Say, for instance, if you want to do econometric studies, you would undertake a survey of a very large sample, and then you would subject it to quantification and statistical analysis and so on. In sciences, of course, you have experimental research. So in a sense, this is how quantitative research is done. And there you are not really concerned with any kind of esoteric phenomenon, but you are looking at specifically at phenomenon which is measurable or which is capable of being quantified. On the other hand, in qualitative research, as I told you, your understanding of the nature of reality, of it being a shared reality where people are actually co-constructing meanings. The meanings, your meanings are determined by your social context and location, and that's how you make sense of the human world and its experiences. That's why you find that, even the way scientific research and social scientific research operate at a different, in a different way. So you need to understand this also when you talk about quantitative research and qualitative research, because see, at any time, in science, you'll have one dominant theory which is actually guiding research, one dominant theory or one dominant paradigm which is actually guiding the research. But in social sciences, it is not like that. There is a multiplicity of paradigms. So say, for instance, if I am looking at the production process, I'm looking at what is happening in the shop floor in a factory. Now, I can use the Marxian perspective and look at how the workers are getting alienated, or I can use some perspective from management and examine, productivity and so on. I can make a Fordist analysis and so on. So you can use, so in social sciences, you don't really have one given theoretical framework. There is a multiplicity of perspectives and frameworks. Okay. So we need to actually understand this in order to, really figure out the difference between quantitative research and qualitative research. Now, how do you understand qualitative research? What are certain methods or certain strategies of inquiry which are actually deployed in qualitative research? Now, there are certain say for instance, you have ethnography. Okay. Now, ethnography is a method of inquiry which is actually deployed in anthropology. Then in certain contexts in sociology, mostly in anthropology, even certain sociological studies where they undertake a study of caste and religion, kinship, etc. They deploy ethnography, and now what we find is that in the last few decades, ethnography is even being deployed in the area in which I'm working, that is science, technology, and society studies. So ethnography means, you have where a social scientist would actually study a particular cultural group in their own natural setting over a prolonged period of time. So they would make field notes, they would engage in participant observation and so on, and they would stay there for a long period of time. And then, basically, they would experience a sense of shared reality. They would participate in all their culture, customs, traditions, etc. So that's why we call it, studies of a cultural group in a natural setting over a prolonged period of time. Then, of course, another way to actually, look into qualitative data and grapple with qualitative data is grounded theory. Now, grounded theory, this perspective was provided by two social scientists called Glaser and Strauss. Okay. So what they said that normally, what do we do in research? Normally in research, we take a particular framework. And then we, before we go into the field or before we engage in experimentation, we try to contextualize our research problem in terms of a particular theory. But in grounded theory, the idea is that you need to take the theory from the data which you get from the field. So based on whatever observations you get in the field means, see, for social scientists, when they go out, say if I'm working on, religious beliefs among a particular community, or I'm looking at caste conflicts in a particular community, or I'm looking at, organization culture in a particular firm, and so on, depending upon whichever discipline I am in. So when I go, and try to collect data, etc., that area becomes my field. Okay. So, rather than going with a preset theoretical framework in mind and trying to fit your data to that framework, what Strauss and Glaser say that the theory must be grounded in whatever empirical phenomenon and findings that you get from the field. Now, the third strategy of inquiry is case studies. Now, in case studies, basically, sometimes you try to undertake a detailed study of a particular event or a phenomenon or a process or an institution or organization, and you do it in depth. That happens. Like, for instance, in management studies, you would do a study only of a particular firm. You look at its different units, you look at R&D, marketing, HR, and so on, and you could do just one study of a particular firm. Then the fourth strategy of inquiry would be narrative research. As I told you, in qualitative research, since you are focusing on the co-construction of meanings and reality, there the narratives of your respondents, the stories that your respondents tell you, the data that you get from your respondents, the sense that you get from the field, that becomes very important, and that is the anchoring point of your research. So narrative research, it's largely based on the analysis of stories and narratives. And in addition, you have historical research, which is based on archival material. Now, it's not necessary that you undertake historical research only for history. Okay, but you can do it for any in any social science discipline or humanities, or even if you want to study, you can study about the history of scientific institutions. So you can use archival material for that, and you can engage in historical research. Now, just I'll take just about 5 or 10 minutes more. Can I do that, Dr. Murugan?
Yes, doctor. You can continue.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah. So I'll just take 5 or 10 minutes more, and then I'll just finish my talk.
Okay.
So, as I said, I am by training a social scientist, and what we are trying to do is to look at the social dimension or the social context of science and technology. See, what we must understand is that, science and technology, they are not, autonomous entities, but they are very much embedded in the larger social context. We know that science and technology is shaping every aspect of our life, but at the same time, they are also being shaped. For instance, just to give you a very simple example, for instance, sometimes policy, government policy says that whatever S&T research is done must actually lead to social change. So there actually this is just a very simple example that I'm giving to illustrate how social agendas can also shape the direction of science and technology research. Or for instance, say for instance, funding. Sometimes, you may be interested in doing research in a particular area, but funding and sources are limited. Whereas, the mandate is that you should engage in research in a different area. So in that sense, so this is why, these are a few examples of why we say that you can't really look at science and technology as autonomous entities, but you have to understand how they are embedded in the larger social context. Again, in science and technology, we find that, people, if you look at a typical scientific disposition, you would say that, science is objective and we are interested in facts, not values. That means, somewhere the normative dimension is cast aside. But, the normative dimension is also important because, one can ask the question, science and technology for whom? Like if you look at large scale industrial science and technology, who are the players it is benefiting? How is it benefiting developed nations? How it is benefiting developing countries? If you have IPRs, how is the IPR system benefiting developed countries, and how is it, in what ways are developing countries benefiting or losing out? Now, there are any number of examples. For instance, when you allow multinational companies to, sell genetically modified seeds to farmers. And of course, I don't want to debate on the rights and wrongs of this because, see, this is a contested terrain. GM foods are a contested terrain, and there are a lot of debates on the rights and wrongs of it and so on. So I don't want to get into those debates. But what the larger point I'm trying to make here is that when you look at science and technology, you find that, especially if you consider its impact on society, you find that the risks and benefits, the costs of science and technology are actually unevenly distributed. Because say, for instance, dams signal development, they signal, growth and so on. But in a sense, they also lead to displacement. There are any number of examples. So science and technology do not really uniformly impact all individuals in a similar manner. And therefore, that's why understanding the social dimension of S&T is very important. Again, when we we consider, only the technical element of science and technology, and we do not consider that they are also social activities, because ultimately scientists and engineers are also members of certain communities. They are being trained into their practices, and there is a way, there is a social dimension to that as well. How scientists and technologists get trained in terms of different disciplinary orientations. In fact, if you look at the pharma industry, or if you look at the R&D culture, there also you will find that the social dimension is very important, because if you look at the nature of basic research and applied research, or if you look at, say, even in R&D, if you look at new product development and you look at process research. In process research, especially if you see the way R&D is done in firms, there is a lot more secrecy, there is less interaction, and even the project, the way in which the project is done is structured in a particular way. Whereas if you look at basic research units there, or if you look at new product development units there, their method of interacting or the way in which the project is organized will be totally different. So that's why I'm saying there is also a social there is also a social dimension there. Again, S&T practitioners, they are, they are not really, science always paints a picture of disinterestedness and of being factual, etc., which need not be always true, because S&T practitioners, they also have intellectual investments, they have ideological investments, they have economic investments in the kind of knowledge that they come up with, and in the theories and practices that they support, etc. Again, see, this interpenetration of S&T aspect is very important. And why the interpenetration aspect is important is because the interpenetration, because if you look at the way in which science was organized, in fact, if you look at a particular theory by an STS scholar called Michael Gibbons, he talks about, the transition in scientific knowledge production from mode 1 to mode 2, wherein he says that if you see the way the production of scientific knowledge has evolved, initially, you had academic research and industrial R&D being done parallelly, okay, and what you call, so the larger orientation or focus was disciplinary in nature. But then when there is a transition from mode 1 to mode 2, then you find that there is a shift from disciplinary to interdisciplinary. Okay, and again, there is an interpenetration of S&T. Just one example I gave you of that you would not expect it, but even there are basic research units also in firms, because they are also interested in those dimensions of research. So in many ways, again, another example that comes to mind is, this Etzkowitz triple helix model. Like, just to put it in a very simple way, what we find is that there are these, three important interest groups. So you have the state, you have industry, and you have academia. And what we find is that now in the triple helix model, what we say is that government is actually helping industry and academia to come together for engaging in R&D. Okay, so there is this interpenetration of S&T. One example I can think of is this open source drug discovery, which was an initiative of CSIR in the early 2000s, and that worked very well. And many Indian firms and many firms from abroad were also associated with public sector institutions in India. And again, CSIR had also come up with some initiatives with firms like Lupin, etc. And they even came up with important, health-based products they worked in certain therapeutic areas together and so on. So what we find is that this interpenetration of science and technology, it's a very complex phenomenon, but it is happening in many ways. Now, again, of course, it is obvious that, social dimension of S&T is important because of ethical and legal issues. See, there are many contestations with regard to emerging technologies, okay, be it nanotechnology and, safety related issues, or say biotechnology, then artificial intelligence, and genetic testing and so on. So there are a lot of ethical and legal issues involved. There is a lot of contestation in society regarding this. Again, IPR issues are also a source of contestation, and IPR issues are not purely technical as they are made out to be, but they have important implications for society and for knowledge production. Now, again, we say that S&T is social because it uses a lot of devices, it uses artifacts, it's a combination of devices, artifacts, technical processes, and social processes. For instance, think of any S&T activity. So there are certain inscriptive devices, there are certain processes for conducting. Inscriptive devices could be your field notes and your literature, etc. All that is part of your inscriptive devices. Artifacts is the kind of devices that you use in the laboratory, your instrumentation. Okay, technical processes and standardization. Like, for instance, good laboratory practices, GLP or SOP on a shop floor where you are engaging in production, you have standard operating procedures. All these are part of technical processes. Now, we know that, standardization is a very important dimension. And like, for instance, you don't just have certification at the local level, you have certification at the international level also. Like, say, for instance, firms who are exporting abroad, they need to ensure that they have certification of international bodies. So basically, if you look at the processes involved, the artifacts and processes which are involved in S&T also, it's a combination of inscriptive devices, artifacts, technical processes, and social processes. And of course, in social processes, there are policy dimensions, because policy dimensions would influence the kind of artifacts that are permitted, the kind of standardization that is happening. Say, for instance, I can think of in drugs and pharmaceuticals, you have Schedule M for production of bulk drugs and formulations. Then you have again, you have another schedule, and just that the name of the schedule slipped my mind, for clinical trials and so on. Then you have a separate schedule for medical devices and so on. Okay, so I can, so again, you can see the social dimension of S&T in this context. Now, actually, this is, this can be a separate lecture by itself. But, when we talk about scientific method, and that was my, because, I looked through, there were many, ways in which scientific research was being classified, and many methods were outlined and everything. But then I felt that, why must I, deal with something which you obviously know better than me? So I must try to tell you something new. So basically what I want to say is that, the conventional notion of science, and if you look at the philosophy of science, your vision of what science is begins to change and shift radically. Because if you look at the history of scientific knowledge itself, philosophers of science will tell you that there have been contestations and debates over what should be the method of science and what should be the nature of scientific knowledge itself. Okay, like for instance, if you see at one point of time, say under Francis Bacon, if you look at his work, Novum Organum, etc., there you will see that induction was seen as the method of science, going from particular to general. Then if you look at the Cartesian model of René Descartes, you will see that the Cartesian model, the followers of the Cartesian model claim that that is the method of science. And there was, conflict between these followers of induction and followers of deduction. And then again, you will find that from the 17th century onwards, positivism came up. So, I mean, the larger point I'm trying to make is that at different points of time, there is, no such thing called the scientific method actually. Of course, we have a certain conception of what the scientific method should entail. But if you look at the history of scientific knowledge, and if you look through the lens or the prism of philosophy of science, then you will see all these, there have been, these debates so then positivism again, had a certain vision of science. Then that, vision was actually challenged by this model of Karl Popper. So Karl Popper insisted that, positivists said that, verification is the basis of scientific knowledge, verification and observation. So Popper said that, verification, and Popper is a physicist turned philosopher. Okay, so he was a scientist to begin with. So he said, look, the method of science is actually the hypothetical deductivist model. And in fact, this is something which scientists also largely accept, because Popper said that the nature of all knowledge is tentative. Particularly, even the nature of scientific knowledge is tentative, and theories and generalizations are only, they are tentative because new knowledge and new theoretical facts can emerge in order to disprove the earlier generalizations and theories. Okay, so this kind of a model, he put forward this kind of a model, which is called the hypothetical deductivist model. Please bear with me. I'm going through it at breakneck speed because I don't have time. In fact, all these things can actually become part of one lecture itself. Then again, you had Thomas Kuhn, who in his Structure of Scientific Revolutions talks about how it is not through induction or deduction or hypothetical deductivist method, but actually scientific knowledge happens through a paradigm shift. And in fact, this view of the way in which scientific knowledge happens is also considered influential. And in fact, it is even taught as part of methodology to, science students abroad, because what Kuhn said was that, he talked about, pre-paradigmatic and paradigmatic disciplines. Okay. And he said that sciences came under the category of paradigmatic disciplines and social sciences were pre-paradigmatic. Now, what did he mean by a paradigm? A paradigm is a kind of worldview. And he said that once the scientific community came together and accepted that paradigm or worldview, then actually scientific inquiry flourished, because theory, instrumentation, application, all that happened in the context of that particular paradigm which was accepted. But then he said, over a period of time, anomalies start happening. Anomalies means exception, like how in grammar, where you have certain rules, but there are also exceptions. Just like that, he said, anomalies begin to emerge, and after a while, these existing theories and existing models can no longer explain these increasing anomalies, and then there is a kind of revolution. It's not a violent or a bloody revolution, but it's a scientific revolution. It's a peaceful, silent I mean, it's a more, peaceful knowledge-based revolution. And he said that, so he referred to that as a scientific revolution. So he said that in this revolution, the earlier paradigm is actually replaced by a new paradigm. And this process keeps continuing. And then for that paradigm also, the same process occurs. For some time, knowledge flourishes, and then anomalies begin to happen. And then, this is actually happening in a cyclical fashion. And in a sense, Kuhn said that this is how, this is the way, through these paradigm shifts, actually, the knowledge production and the growth of scientific knowledge is happening. And then, of course, you have Paul Feyerabend's perspective, which is the most radical. And he's also another physicist turned philosopher. And his perspective was radical because he said there is no method called the scientific method. In fact, there is this principle of anything goes. And he said that if you look at the way in which, scientific knowledge has developed, basically all kinds of things are happening. Like on one hand, existing new theories which fit in with existing theories are being developed. And again, new theories which contradict existing theories are also being developed. So there is a kind of general anarchy. So scientific method and the growth of scientific knowledge does not really follow any particular logic or order. And he referred to this with the term methodological anarchy. Okay, so what do we find here when we are looking at, whether it is Francis Bacon's the inductivist approach, or Descartes' deductivist model, or the model put forward by positivists, or the hypothetical deductivist model of Popper, or Kuhn's notion of paradigm and scientific revolution, or Feyerabend's notion of methodological anarchy. What we find is that if you look at the history of science and how scientific knowledge emerged, and if you look, there were contestations and debates about the nature of science and scientific method. Okay, so that's why I said that this is, a kind of received thing, when we say, okay, this is how we need to define science, this is how we need to define scientific method. This is a kind of received model. But actually, philosophers of science who have actually looked into, who have studied the growth of scientific knowledge, they say that there are a lot of contestations and debates. Okay, I think I have taken up a lot of your time. And with this, I would like to so with this, I would like to stop, and I await your questions.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for the elaborate lecture. I hope students, students, the session is open for discussion. If you have any doubts or clarifications, you can ask Dr. Parvati. Any questions?
I think it must be lunchtime, and I've already kept them back by half an hour. So, yeah.
You can ask any questions related to research methodology. If you are unable to understand, some things will be new because most of our undergraduates.
Yeah.
So if you have trouble in understanding anything, concepts, you can ask.
Maybe because I came in with the social science perspective, so they might have not. But I felt that
the concept is general, applied to science also.
Yes, because you can't really ignore social concerns, right? Even in
they are all working on the societal problems only.
Problems also. So we have to take this into mind.
can also use chat box to ask questions.
Or, I mean, if they think of something later on, maybe it doesn't strike you immediately, but then you have certain doubts or you need certain clarifications, please feel free to email me. My email is parvatikaiyer@gmail.com. And Dr.
You can put it in the chat
also
box,
give me.
Doctor.
Yeah. How do I put it in the chat? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'll just put it. Yeah. So in case you have any doubts which you need to resolve, you can sort of write to me. Please feel free to write to me.
There is one question in the chat box. How the branch of biotechnology can help to reduce problems in village areas or remote areas?
That you must ask a biotechnology expert. Okay, I can give you only a superficial answer to that question because I am not an expert in that area. I am in biotechnology per se.
Anything else, students?
No, I can think of one thing actually. See, for instance, genomics. Genomics is being used in agriculture. Genomics is being used in agriculture, say to improve crop productivity and things like that. So I can think of it in the context of agriculture. Yes, it can be of use to farmers, and it is being done also because one of our students was doing a case study of this Navsari Agricultural University, where they are coming up with new crop varieties. Now, why this is important? Now you ask me this question. See, for instance, sometimes due to lack of rainfall, you need crop varieties which can thrive even in dry land conditions, and that becomes very important in the context of Gujarat. Okay, in the context of Gujarat coming. So some of these new varieties, seeds in Navsari Agricultural University, they have this Krishi Goshti and Krishi Mahotsav, etc. And they are supplying these seeds to the farmers. And they are also giving them knowledge about the technology. And in that way, I feel that maybe not exactly village or remote areas, but of course, see, 70% of our population, more than 70%, we are an agricultural nation, even now. So in that sense, I feel, yes, definitely biotechnology can help. Second way it can help is in the health sector, in terms of providing vaccines, in terms of providing medicines, etc. There, I think biotechnology can be very useful. But that is also, dependent upon access. It is dependent upon public funding and, welfare measures, etc. Because most of these medicines, see, there is a lot of privatization which is happening, and the costs of medicines are also soaring. And somewhere, if you look at it realistically, the state is also withdrawing. So access to medicines and what you call, there's a word for that, becomes very important. See, even for vaccines, initially people were paying money, and then at some point of time, the government decided to make it free, and therefore it became available. So of course, any new technology, it's all, I mean, it can be useful, but policy also has to play a role, if people have to access it. So off the cuff, this is something that I could think of, but I'm sure, your biotechnology experts will be able to give you much more detailed and, better answers.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's something in there to check box. Yes, the further works.
And good noon, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, like whatever the field we take, irrespective of biotechnology, whether we are taking economics or literature, everywhere, there is a particular sector is keep on working on, the core, like, the socially what deprived, that certain kind of population. Like research is still going on, like, how to take the things to that extent level. Like, like we can see in every field, not only in biotechnology, even every field, to uplift that particular group of people, like research is going on everywhere. So as a student, as an young generation, like how we can contribute to that particular research domain, to take the things to that.
Yeah, in fact, you see this Srishti itself, I am reminded of this. I would like to explain it a little theoretically. Like I told you about the triple helix model, right? Now, this triple helix model, this is a model which was proposed by this person called Etzkovitz, but we can actually see the practical application of the model. I gave you some examples. I told you about how government of India, specifically the CSIR, actually initiated this dialogue between public sector institutions, CSIR institutions, and the industry to come up with drugs. Okay, they did come up with products which were priced cheap. Okay, now similarly, another area which I can think of is Microsoft. Microsoft in India at a particular point of time in 2008, they were involved in adult education programs. So there again, you can see how technology is actually being made for the betterment of the people. Again, if you look at the leather industry, etc., there again, you will see CSIR has done a lot of work in providing livelihood for, and in improving the conditions of leather workers by, supplying them with know-how about technology, by, supplying them with materials, know-how, all kinds of things. So I think these are some of the initiatives, and you can find this in any sector. And these are some of the initiatives through which technology S&T efforts can actually benefit the poorest of the poor. I think this is what we need to keep in mind. So there are innumerable examples like this,
Yeah, ma'am, got it. Yeah.
Any other questions? No more questions, then I would like to thank Dr. Parvati Iyer for joining us today. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Thank you, sir. So I think I'll leave. So it was nice to interact with you all, and hope you all have a good session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.